Let's all get a songbook and turn to page number 775. 775. We've had a request tonight on music, but I'm still going to sing. Somebody figure that out. We'll sing all 4 verses. Brother Kermit, would you pray for us? Amen. Well, it's good to have everybody back tonight. Last week you was here. I was out sitting by a campfire watching on YouTube. And I sent Brother Jeff a text. Brian was telling all the stories about everything going on and 2 shootings. And I said, when the mayor of Cunot gets back, I'm going to put a stop to that shooting. Does anybody hear about any shootings in Cunot this week? They got wind that I was back and they quit it. They've put them guns up, and Except last night, my wife needed something simple like ice cream from the dollar store, and we was coming through town. She always goes down here and gets stuff. She stopped at the dollar store in town. I said, "What's the matter? Are you afraid of the shootings?" She's a coward. Of course, I wasn't going to go get it myself, but we do have new prayer lists. I don't know if everybody got one, but we've got new lists out back there. And don't forget, this Sunday evening, we will be at Seed Line. I encourage you again to come. It's hard to get everybody to come. Sometimes we just kind of think of, oh, it's a no church service. We'll stay at home and do. I don't know what people do when they don't go, but it's sort of like a revival to me. It's a different location. It's not maybe not be in a church building, but it's sort of like a revival and just good atmosphere. And there'll be good preaching and good singing. So I hope you can come and be part of that. And it goes through Wednesday, so maybe you can come more than one night. Come as much as you can. I'm looking to see if there's other things I've forgot about on here. The ladies' meeting that's normally next Tuesday will not be Tuesday; it'll be the following Tuesday. If you ladies did not already know all that. Now, what's some things going on our prayer list? I do have one thing. Mrs. Larkin, who sits back here, her husband sits in the red chair there. Her brother Steve Ream and his wife have been coming, and I just got a message from her a little while ago. He's been on arthritis medicine, I believe it is, something. Let me see if I can look it back up. But anyhow, whatever he's been on for years, it's easier for me to look it up. Yes, he's been on arthritis medicines for 10 years, but his kidneys are down to 65% of function because of it, so they took him off, and now he can't hardly walk because of arthritis. So pray for him. His name's Steve Ream. I put him on list number 4. I think my I don't know how I got him off of there. On list number 5, my neighbor, his name is Joe Hubbard. He's not going to be around much longer. So pray for his family. And a couple of weeks ago, he was still sitting out in the garage talking to people, but yesterday he pretty well doesn't know what's going on anymore. So Hubbard, Hubbard. I think that's how you spell it. That's how I spell it. Yes, ma'am. Chris Dean. Okay. You say Valerie Abernathy. We've got her on here somewhere? Oh, okay. Okay. Valerie Abernathy. I'm trying to remember for those who watch on YouTube. See, every now and then I have to take a vacation and sit by a campfire and watch the service on YouTube so I'll know what I don't do right. And I got to remember to repeat these prayer requests when you folks say them, because sitting out there you don't get it all. And then I heard Brian explain how he's as the girls were being born, he kept thinking he was going to have a boy and he was going to learn to help them, and he can't fix hair, can't do any of that. And I sent Mr. Jeff a message. I said, I did. When the kids were growing up, I was in charge of the boys here. What do you think? He sent me a text back, you ruined them, he said. So I'm not in charge of hair no more. thought I did take them off, but Jay Morgan, you can take off the list. Let's get that right again. Yeah. Okay, so Beverly and Jay up here at the top. How did we get them on there twice? Okay. Yes, ma'am. Okay. While we're taking stuff off, I think Mr. Don Carter's on here. I think he's doing fine. He had hip surgery. He's been going well now. Dennis Morgan just got his eyes worked on. I think he enjoys surgery because he's always got something going on. And I've accused Paul Gully of this. He's always having a surgery. I accuse him of liking it because it scares me just the thought of surgery. In fact, my right rotator cuff is messed up, and I looked up, I would have to not use it for like 6 months. It's not that bad. I'm just not going to do anything with it for a while. I'd rather complain about it than have to get it fixed. I guess maybe that's a bad style. That's what my wife says. Well, we'll pray you on not on the sick list, but we'll just keep you. I'll keep you on my personal list anyhow. Keep you out of trouble. Yeah. We're not going to have a bad winter this year if anybody wants to just go ahead and stay up here. I think Bob would. Well, now you stayed a little longer last year, and then it got bad. And it seemed like you was kind of glad to get out of here when you finally did. That's bad. Okay. Okay. Okay, so put Mary and Irene on there. They'll be traveling, headed to Florida next week. Now, I see JC's place is back pending. Is he got another person coming through, or? They what now? Oh, yo, it'll sell. If they stay in the middle of November, we'll have to send JC down there like a little popsicle. Yeah. And Anything going on anywhere we need to talk about? Okay, well, we will come to the prayer list at the end of the service, and we'll pray ending the service. If you got a Bible tonight, open to the book of Ephesians, chapter number 4. Ephesians, chapter number 4. Some of you is not always. I actually grew up here at Faith Baptist Church, and I did go to another church as they changed leadership around here. I did go to another church for a couple of years, about the time Karen and me got married. In fact, we didn't get married in this church. We got married at Bible Baptist Church. But for the most part, I've always been here in Cunot, and I've always been here at Faith Baptist Church. But for those of you who's traveled and lived different places and been in different churches, and can you think of a perfect church anywhere? I can't either. In fact, I remember growing up, so they used to say it, and maybe a preacher said it, I don't know if it was a joke, but it said something about if you ever find a perfect church, don't join it, because then it won't be perfect. So there's a lot of truth to that. But I don't believe there is a perfect church anywhere, but I can give you a perfect description of one, and that's what we're going to look at tonight in Ephesians chapter number 4. And it's not a picture of, it's not a description of a perfect church, it's a description of a good, strong church, but it gives a very perfect description of it. And actually there's 3 words I'm going to use and to kind of describe this church, and I like looking at things like this. I think we ought to strive to have this type of things. Our church ought to be this way, and so we want to look at it. But we'll read the verses first, and then we'll find those 3 words I want to talk about. It starts there in verse number 1. Paul writing says, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you that you walk worthy of the vocation wherewith you are called, with all lowliness and meekness, with long suffering, forbearing one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, even as ye are called in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father over all, who is above all, and through all, and in you all. So he was part Kentuckian. You could tell that. He had to get all them you-alls and things in. Verse 7 says, but unto every one of us is given grace according to the measure of the gift of Christ. Wherefore he saith, when he ascended up on high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts unto men. Now that he ascended, what is it but that he also descended first into the lower parts of the earth? He that descended is the same also that ascended up far above all heavens, that he might fill all things. And he gave some apostles, and some prophets, and some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers, for the perfecting of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ, till we all come in the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, unto a perfect man, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, that we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro, and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men, and cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive. But speaking the truth in love, may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ, for whom the whole body fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplieth, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, maketh increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love. You say, preacher, you said a lot there, and I don't know what you said. Well, Paul's describing there what I would call a great, strong church, a growing church, a healthy church. And he used, there's 3 words I want to use that'll help us to see what he's talking about in what a church ought to be. I know a lot of big churches. I know a lot of small churches. And I know a lot of what I would call, in the mix of all of them, a lot of churches that are really they're just dysfunctional. They're there, they exist. As I said Sunday, there are many churches today that think the reason they exist is to make sure they put food on somebody's table somewhere, make sure that they put clothes on their back. That's not the purpose of a church. That's a side effect of a church. That's something that happens, something we do, but that's not what we're here for. And so, but these verses here tells you how you can have, if we do these things, he said, you'll have a strong church. You'll have a healthy church. And the first 6 verses deal with what I call unity. A healthy church is one that's characterized by unity and oneness, by love and a sense of commonness. I mean, people ought to feel at home there. People that are part of the church, they ought to feel at as much at home at church as they would anywhere else that they go. And it is a sad thing. In fact, I'm going to do this. I keep promising, but we've not done it. But I am going to do it. I just talked to two people in here. They both sit right over here on this side. And one said, I don't know who that is. And so I finally had to connect them. The other one said, again, both of them over here. So I talked to the other one and said, well, I'm not sure who that is. They've both been part of this church for years, and they don't know who each other is. I don't know if that's good English, but it's not a good thing to do. We ought to know people in our church. Now, you may not know them real well, but you ought to see somebody, at least know part of their name, their first name or last name or something about them. They teach a Sunday school class, or they take up the offering, or they carry a gun and shoot the bystander, or whatever they do. But we ought to know something about them. And so unity, and you can only have unity when the members and the attenders are marked by humility. It's not about them. And I know a lot of people in churches, not this church. I'm glad to say not this church, but I know a lot of people in churches that everything's about them. They don't really know anybody else in church. It's what's going on in my life. I need people to pray for me. They don't pray for other people. I need people to help me. They don't help other people. That's not the way I have unity in church. And so I'm going to read a lot of these verses. We read them, and I'm going to read them again. Paul says, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you that you walk worthy of the vocation wherewith you are called, with all lowliness. Now, I said for us to have that, there has to be humility. We're not thinking about ourselves. Paul says, with all lowliness and meekness, with long suffering, forbearing one another in love. I read that several times, that phrase there. With long suffering, forbearing one another in love. Really, literally, we could say it this way. Put up with one another in love. Everybody's different. Sometimes I talk to people and they struggle because some people in their church are not, well, there are people I know that are very outspoken. There are people I know that are very soft-spoken. There's some folks in this church that you couldn't hardly, sometimes you wonder if they ever talk. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just their personality. And so he says we ought to be able to just get along with each other in love. Different personalities, different ideas, different mindsets, but we still ought to be able to have unity. And in fact, in my daily Bible reading, I come across an interesting verse in the book of Proverbs, and I like it. It says this, a fool's wrath is presently known, but a prudent man covereth shame. In other words, he's talking about a person who's genuinely humble doesn't get offended real easy. If you're a person, and again, this Sunday night or Wednesday night crowd, I doubt if you're one of those, but if you're a person who's easily offended, easily irritated, you're going to struggle in life, because God says that you're a lot better off. And Solomon, the wise man here, he said you're better. He said, fools, you'll know their wrath is presently known. As soon as something doesn't like it, they let everybody know about it. But he said, a prudent man, he covers shame. And we shouldn't be easily offended. I have files on my computer. I used to have them in files, and then finally I got smart enough to figure out how to use a computer. I started pastor in 2000, and our computer was dial-up. And so what you would do if you wanted to turn it on, you turned it on and waited, and maybe 15, 20, 25 minutes later you could get something. That didn't work so well. So things speeded up. The computer system speeded up. I can find things. So now I put everything into files. Whereas used to, I looked up everything in books and paper files. Now I have it in files on my computer. And so I go through these files, and I put things in there for use them for illustrations for later dates. And I found in there an article this week that it was a letter written to Ann Landers, which she's probably been dead 25 years. I'm not sure, but anyhow, I'm going to read the letter. This lady was writing to her because she was upset with her husband. And I want to read you the letter. And I'm talking about this verse. A fool's wrath is presently known, but a prudent man covers shame. How easily are you offended? Listen to this lady. She says, I've been married to Lewis for 10 years. Last weekend, there was a birthday party for one of Lewis's relatives. I bought a gift and a card and left them on the dining room table while he dressed. Usually I sign the cards for the whole family, but I thought it would be nice if Lewis handled this one. So I asked him to sign it. When he returned to the bedroom, he said he signed all of our names. I don't know what possessed me, but for some reason I felt compelled to check. I opened the sealed envelope and saw the card signed, Love, Uncle Lewis, Jane, Tabby, and Martha. Jane is our daughter. Tabby's our cat. My name is Martha. I put the card back and resealed the envelope, but I was so angry I couldn't see straight. Let me stop there. Could I tell you one of the people that used to be part of this church? A very similar thing. The last conversation we had in my office, they were so angry they couldn't see straight, and it was absolutely nothing they was angry about. But that was the last thing they could see. They didn't hear a word I said. The last Sunday morning they come to church, they told me, said, I didn't hear a word you said when you preached. I was so angry. This is just about what she was angry about. I mean, it's just about this level. But this lady said, my name's Martha. I put the card back, resealed it. I was so angry I couldn't see straight. Can you imagine? And not only did he sign our daughter's name before mine, but even the cat's name was before mine. After a few minutes, I said to Lewis, why did you sign our names in that way? He replied, what's wrong with it? Needless to say, we got into a terrible argument. He thinks I'm making a big deal over nothing. I'm hurt and angry. Was he wrong to sign our names that way? Please give me some advice. Now, I don't know if any of you folks were Ann Landers listeners or watchers or readers, and I probably don't know that I ever was, but every now and then she give a pretty good answer here, in my opinion. Here's what she said. So the cat's name appeared on the card ahead of yours. Big deal. I hope you never have anything more insulting to be upset about. Get your priorities straight, lady, and save the adrenaline for more important matters. Good advice. You see, the verse again, a fool's wrath is presently known, but a prudent man covers shame. Maybe something like that might irritate you a little bit, but if you'd make that known enough that you'd even write to the newspaper, there's something wrong there. And so here in Ephesians 4, Paul's cautioning the Ephesians about being easily offended, about having your feelings easily hurt, and especially as God's people, I say this about myself, and I've had people, and I've told you this before, I've had people from this church call and apologize because they said some funny thing about me, and they're afraid to hurt my feelings. And I've told them, if you can ever say anything that would hurt my feelings, it's my fault, because I pick on everybody. That's what I do. I just make fun of people, and I don't mean anything harsh about anything. So if I would get upset because you say something back toward me, then there's something wrong with me, not you. And so be careful about that. And he goes on in verse 3, says, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. And then he gives us a good biblical reason for our unity. He says we're to be in one spirit because we belong to one body. And that one body is under the control of the Lord. It says, verse 4, there is one body, one spirit, even as ye are called into one hope of your calling. So occasionally, people's going to disagree. Occasionally, people say, now, and granted, there's probably things that people said to you that might have irritated you a little bit, or maybe you didn't like the way they said it, or did something, but we've got to be careful to disagree without upsetting the unity. And I think you can do that. I've down through the years, I know I've disagreed with a whole lot of things that's happened in the church, happened even at home and all that, but for us to be part of one family, which says we're part of one family, we're controlled by one Spirit, we're led by one Lord, hey, we're headed to one great hope, the hope of His coming and taking us back. So Jesus Himself said that the world, they'll know you're Christians by your love. If we walk around offended all the time, especially you get offended at church, then go to work and tell everybody at work about it, that's not going to do too well for reaching people for Christ. So be careful of that. So the first word that I would say that describes a good church, a solid church, a healthy church is the word unity. And then the second paragraph, it's all about another word, diversity. Verse 7 starts with the conjunction. That's a word I learned in English, conjunction. I had to look that up today to find out what it was. But it starts with the word but. We're united into one body, into one family, but unto every one of us is given grace according to the measure of the gift of Christ. Now, the grace he's referring to here is not saving grace. It's what I call serving grace. And he goes on to tell us that God's given every person in the church a special gift in order for us to serve Him. Now, yours may not be playing the violin, or yours may not be playing the guitar or playing the piano or something like that. I'm not talking about that type of gifts, but he did say that in those verses, and I'm not going to read them again, not all of them, but when he ascended back into heaven, he said he sent the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, and he distributed those gifts to the people of the church. In fact, it says in verse 11, he gave some apostles and some prophets, some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers. So all of those are gifts. I call them office gifts, but they're given to the church. What's the reason for them? For the perfecting of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ. So those gifts are there to help you and I, not to do the work for us, but those gifts, the apostles are there, the prophets, the evangelists that we have in, the pastors, the teachers, they're there to help us to grow, to edify us, to build us up so we can go out and do the work of the ministry. It's not their job, it's not the pastor's job, it's not everybody else's job to do it. It's our job to get it done, but those gifts are given to the church. And there's other places in the Bible, over in Romans and 1 Corinthians and 1 Peter, I think there's somewhere around 15 other gifts mentioned, but the reason I'm talking about them tonight is not to try to list all the gifts, but to emphasize the point that Paul's making here, that if you're saved, God's gifted you. He's given you something that you can do in some way for a service to him. It may be something as encouragement. It may be something as much as going by and just letting people be an encouragement to people. And gift of helps. There's all kinds of things that you and I don't think too much about, but God has enabled us to be very good at those things and encouragement to other places. And I think you and I are placed here on this earth to accomplish a task. And God puts us in the right place, specifically designed for us to get something done. So if you're here at Faith Baptist Church, there's something God's put you here for, something here to do. And earlier back in chapter 2, he says, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus unto good works, which God hath before ordained that we should walk in them." So God planned it out long before. He said, I've got something, and he could call out all of our names. He knows who's here tonight. He knows what's going on. And he said God ordained it ahead of time for us to be here. He ordained it ahead of time for us to be part of this church so that we can accomplish something for him, serve him. And in the process, it helps edify the other Christians around us and encourage them. And so we have a responsibility. My thought is, what makes a strong church? Unity. Everybody works together. Not the same, but together. But then there's diversity. Everybody's different. Not everybody does the same things, but it all works together. And it'd be no different if you was, I was talking back there a while ago, I run my car through a car wash. I've already forgot the name of them. They're probably the best car wash. They're most expensive, but they're the best. And I drew a blank. Crew, there you go, Crew Car Wash. And they've got one in Avon now that not only will they wash your car, but you can get in another line, and they let you get out and walk over here. You get a cup of coffee, some water, whatever you want, and they clean it, the inside. It's nice. Now, it's not quite what you would get if you went somewhere and got it really taken care of, but they do a great job. And I got to talking all this, and I forgot the word, and I forgot this, and so I forgot what I was talking about. Everybody's got a job to do is what I'm saying. And they all work, and they work together, and it gets it done. So there's diversity. If they all did the same thing, the car wouldn't come out too good. But I've been reading in the book of Jeremiah some, and in the very first chapter there, when God calls Jeremiah and tells him what he wants him to do, here's what he says. He says, talking to Jeremiah, he says, "Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. And before thou camest forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee. And I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations." So he says, Jeremiah, just so you'll know it, before you was ever even born, before you was ever even conceived, I already had a plan for you. I already had something I wanted you to do. And I'm not preaching on this tonight, but whenever someone tries to tell you that babies are not, until they're born, they're not real, they're not human, they're not, well, this one was. God said he was. God said I already had a plan for you. And so he's got a job that only you can do. Now, what happens if you don't do it? Well, there's a whole lot of folks that's going to be in hell someday because no one ever told them. And it's our fault because God made it. He had a plan for us. But a lot of people are not doing what God tells us to do. And so he's put us here for a certain period of time to do what he's called us to do. I'm talking about diversity. I was thinking about some people I've read after some things there. An old British preacher back in the 17th century, his name was Thomas Fuller. He says, "God's children are immortal while their Father hath anything for them to do on earth." Now, And I believe that. Now, I'm not thinking that we ought to be stupid about things. I know God's got things for me to do, so I could say, well, I'm immortal until God's done with me, so I'll just walk out here in front of traffic. No, because then I'd find out that God was done with me, because he said, as soon as you do something stupid, I'll let you go. And I had a real funny story, but I didn't put it in here. But I'm thinking about that phrase and that thought that God's got something for us to do, and until he's done with us, we're not going anywhere. Charles Spurgeon in 1871 was preaching at a church, and this is what he said to the congregation. He said, whatever occurs around us, we need not be alarmed. We are immortal until our work is done. And amidst infectious or contagious diseases, if we are called to go there, we may sit as easily as though in balmy air. It is not ours to preserve our life by neglecting our duty. And I read this, and I thought, what a good phrase for us to think about in the day we live. He said, it's not ours to preserve our life by neglecting our duty. It is better to die in service than live in idleness. Better to glorify God and depart than rot above ground in neglecting what he would have us to do. Unto God belong the issues from death. We may therefore go without, and I can't even say whatever that word was, without worrying and danger where duty calls. And here's my thought. We live in a day where there's a lot of dangers out there. There's a good chance if you go out somewhere, you're going to get, sooner or later, vaccinated or not, you're going to get COVID somewhere. Now, some people have decided to withdraw from the world, and they're doing nothing. To me, that's not life. I don't want to get it. I mean, I've had it. I don't want to get it again, and I don't want to be sick from it. I don't want to leave this earth from it. But if that's what it would take, if it's that, or set away from everybody and be scared of everything and afraid to move, then I kind of like the way he said it. It's not. He said, amidst infectious, contagious diseases, if we're called to go there, we may sit as easily as though in balmy air. If I'm doing what God's called me to do, I have to trust him. Now, that doesn't mean I have to be stupid. If you're going to a bunch of places where people are sick, you need to avoid things, or you need to wear your mask, you need to whatever. But you don't have to go around afraid of everything. And the Bible says, "My times are in thy hand," or as the old song says, "We'll work till Jesus comes, then we'll carry it home." And that's the truth. And again, I don't know how I got into all this, but it's got to do with diversity. And sometimes God's got work for us to do within the perimeter of church ministries. And churches, we're always looking for teachers, we're always looking for musicians, for greeters, for ushers, nursery workers, people in children's ministries, and probably 1,000 other things. There's a lot of things that goes on here, and so we're always looking for that. But sometimes the ministry is outside of the organized programs. It might be caring for a loved one in a nursing home. Somebody has to do that. Someone needs to be there, and it is amazing, as I even talked to sister tonight, there's people that are in the nursing home, family members don't come see them. Now, I realize people can't be there all the time. That's why they're there, and you can't care for them around the clock. But it's hard for me to imagine that people would take their family and put them somewhere and just leave them and not go see them. But it happens. But our ministry might be helping for those, maybe volunteering in the hospital, and I don't even know if they let you do that anymore. But our ministry also could be just such as trying to reach those co-workers for Christ. Let them know what God's done in your life. And I got a lot of stories that I read and I keep track of. And I read one about a lady who went to her preacher and was complaining about her work environment. We had a fella here a few years ago. He's passed away now, but I remember him coming and telling me he was going to quit where he worked because everybody there curses and does all of that. And they said it's not a good environment. And I tried to talk him out of it, but he wasn't having no way of it. He quit and I don't know what he did, if he did anything after that. But this young lady, she come to her pastor. Excuse me. She was complaining about the work environment. She said that people were rude and crude. She said her co-workers used a filthy language, and she said, I'm the only Christian there, and I just don't think I can put up with it. And her pastor asked her one question of 5 words, and it completely changed her perspective. And from that point on, she understood why God put her there, and she went back to work every day with a new purpose and a new attitude. Here was his question. Where do you put lights? Put them in the dark places. She understood that. She was a light in a dark place, and that's why God had put her there. And she went, everything changed for her. And there's a need, and we got to fill it. There's a work, and we got to do it. There's a crown, as the song says, and we got to win it. And that's what we got to understand that. And so there's a lot of gifts, there's a lot of jobs, a lot of diverse ministries, but they function together in unity of the church. And when you have that, you have a good church. You have a strong church. So what happens when we all go about our assigned task? That brings me to the third paragraph, the one that talks about growing and maturity within the church. So when unity is being exhibited and diversity is being exercised in the church, verse 14 says that we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro, and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness whereby they lie in wait to deceive. But speaking the truth in love may grow up in things in all things, which is the head, even Christ, for whom the whole body fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplieth, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, maketh the increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love. When a church is doing when we have unity, when we have everybody working, the church grows, people grow, and it's no more childish. He said, grow, don't be children anymore. People, and still, there are a lot of people I know today. I talked to a man in a church that runs between 600 and 1,000. And he said, be honest with you, we don't have a handful of people we can choose for deacons because no one is spiritually mature. No one's growing. No one's trying. And that's a shame. It shouldn't be that way. And because people need, it ought to be a church growing. There ought to be maturity. When all those things work, there is maturity. And I read a story of Lawrence of Arabia. He visited Paris after World War I with some Arab friends, and he showed them around Paris, but what they were so most fascinated about, faucets in their motel room. They'd never seen anything like it. They spent hours turning the faucets on and off, and they thought it was wonderful. And all they had to do was turn this handle, and they got all the water they wanted. Now remember, they're from Arabia, and so when it came time to leave, he found them in the bathroom trying to detach the faucets. And he explained to them, first they told him, they said, it's very dry in Arabia, and what we need are faucets. If we had faucets in Arabia, we'd have all the water we want. And he had to explain to them that the effectiveness of the faucets was only because they were tied in to the water system. They had to be tied into the pipeline. And the effectiveness of you and I for being reaching others for Christ, our effectiveness for being an encouragement to others, our effectiveness for making a church a strong church is whether or not we're tied into God's pipeline. If we're doing things in our own strength, and I would say this way, is God's love flowing through us by way of unity, by way of diversity, by way of maturity? That was Paul's description of a strong church. And here's my prayer for Faith Baptist Church, that the Lord would make each of us humble, as he talks about here, make us hardworking, make us mature channels of his living water for a spiritually dehydrated world that we live in. And he can do that. You don't have to be highly educated. You just have to be willing to follow the Lord. We want a strong church, and I hope that God would give us that very thing. Now, with all that said, that was probably shorter than Brian last week, right? Maybe not. I didn't give any bad stories about not knowing how to comb the girl's hair, though I can't believe that he can't comb girls' hair. Them girls, by the way, if you just barely comb their hair, they got delicate heads. They can't handle it. Is all girls that way when they're young? I don't know. But them girls right there, you start combing their hair, there's big tears in their eyes. So I make Grandma, when she does it, I make her be very careful because we don't want them grandkids crying. Now, if you got a prayer list, we better go to prayer. And thank you again for coming, being part of the service. And come back Sunday morning. And I would tell you I was going to preach on Sunday morning, but I've got about 5 things working right now, and I haven't figured out yet which one the Lord wants. So we're just going to keep working on them until one of them turns up and says this is it. But remember to pray for things going on. Remember, we put Mr. Ream on there. and Valerie and Mary's taken off, and just a few things going on. So you finish praying, and you'll be dismissed. Thank you again. Have a good evening.